sort of gangster, you know, because this is a gangster story, but a gangster with a difference, because this is a gangster with...
He was really nothing but an antisocial gangster.
He is a sort of gangster, you know, because this is a gangster story, but a gangster with a difference, because this is a gangster with a conscience.
I don't need no gun to do my thing. Mao Zedong said that power grows out the barrel of a gun. He never said that power was a gun.
He was really nothing but an antisocial. He was really nothing but an antisocial. He was really nothing but an antisocial gangster.
He is a sort of gangster, you know, because this is a gangster.
He was really nothing but an antisocial gangster.
He is a sort of gangster, you know, because this is a gangster story, but a gangster with a difference, because this is a gangster with a conscience.
I don't need no gun to do my thing. Mao Zedong said that power grows out the barrel of a gun. He never said that power was a gun. That's why I don't need no gun to do my thing. What I need is some freedom. What I need is the power to determine my destiny.
Niggas lying, rapping about a life that they never live. Realize, these streets crying for a miracle. I'm on fire, I am a miracle. These niggas lying, rapping about a life that they never live. That's why hip-hop's dying. These streets crying for a miracle. I'm on fire, I'll never die, I am a miracle. These niggas lying, rapping about a life that they never live. Realize, these streets crying for a miracle. I'm on fire, I'll never die, I am a miracle. Niggas lying, rapping about a life that they never live. Pussy ass niggas, these streets crying for a miracle. I'm on fire, I'll never die, I am a miracle.
I am America. Fuck it, man. We just gonna go ahead and goddamn run the intro, shawty. Ain't nobody got in here yet, so fuck it. Let's run the play.
What's this guy's name? It's something Hawk. And it may sound stereotypical, but dude looks like he's done some time and sounds like he's done some time.
I don't give a fuck what you think, bitch. Your thoughts ain't my thoughts. Bitch, I'm flowing straight from the survival scroll. Cut that bitch off. Next caller.
Yo. Peace to the tribes. You already know what it is. You live with the Incredible Hawk. You know what I'm talking about? And tonight we will be discussing... Well, actually, we're going to have a little, more of a give and take conversation. You know what I mean? We're going to check out some audio. We have Chief Langley from like 7 years ago, and he's dropping some jewels on his research because, as you know, he says he's what's the word? A forensic. What is it? Forensic genealogist. Yeah, that's what it is. So we're gonna check out that audio. Yo, peace to the tribes. Shout out Trauma Hawk in this bitch. The Real Ash Boogie. Tracy Wilkie. D. Harris. Tribe. Appreciate you for tuning in. Damn, did I put this shit in the description like I was supposed to? I don't think I did. I think I'm fucking up low key. Well, you'll have to go to the community tab, I guess, to get the link. But we are on Aboriginal America with a Q. America with a Q. We'll be over there. You know what I'm talking about? Let's see. Let's get just a little better here, man. So if you would like to get in on the conversation, that's the way we're gonna do it. On these type of builds, we'll be doing them usually on Aboriginal America, our other YouTube channel, which is, it's not just about us. It's never just about us. You know how we rocking. And if you got an idea for a discussion, that's exactly what we. That's the whole purpose of the clubhouse, so other people can get involved in the conversation, and then that way, when we have these type of give and take kind of dialogues, then we'll you could tap in on the clubhouse, you know what I mean, and be able to have your voice heard. That way we don't have any limitations. So make sure you go subscribe to Aboriginal America on YouTube. And that must be Hunter Show. What's up with you, brother?
It's all good. Mhm.
Yeah, peace.
Well, I take that back.
Oh shit! Don't
It
take it
ain't
back.
all good,
It's all good, man. Don't do
but a
that.
lot of it is good.
It's mostly good.
This House of Cards is about to fall because people done caught on that this guy that's acting as Brandon is not Joe Biden.
Brandon, you say his name is?
Yeah, that's what the governor of Florida labeled him, and we rolling with it, and because he knows that he's an actor, a stand-in, or imposter, or body double, and that the original Biden with the earlobes is evidently on ice, waiting to be thawed out after they play their next game.
I thought they already thawed all them niggas out.
Now they saving this one. This is gonna be a good one.
Let me get my banner back on here, man.
But
Are you scared?
scared of what? I'm too old to be scared.
That part. I knew that was gonna be your answer. I just figured I'd fuck with you.
I mean, what can they do to me?
Nothing.
When I wanted a job, or wanted a degree, or wanted this, or wanted that, they had that carrot on their stick.
Right.
Now they can dangle that carrot on their stick all they want. I'm not interested in the stick or the carrot.
Tribe. You already know how we rock it. Yeah, so I figured this would also be a good platform for, like, when we have our builds. You know what I'm saying? I know you like to get on here, chop it up on the phone. It's a little more accessible for you to do it this way. So
Yeah, I did this with Dane Calloway once, so yeah,
okay.
we can roll like this.
Yeah, we just trying to get everybody together. So yeah, if you're in the chat on YouTube, man, we over here at Clubhouse. If you rock with Clubhouse, I want to give a shout out to my nigga Posted over at eBan, because that nigga really did teach me the recipe to even be able to attempt to do this. So I don't know if other niggas is on the app giving it up to my nigga, but I'm all the way authentic. Tribe, y'all know how I'm rocking. So I'm grateful. So I just wanted to shout that brother out because this is my first stream doing it this way, to where we're on the Clubhouse and streaming, and I straight got it from that nigga. So I'm not gonna cap. I don't know about these other clowns, but why don't we play some of this audio, and then we'll get into the discussion. So if you want to mute up for me on the show, we're gonna play a little audio, and then we'll pause intermittently, and if you feel like you want to add on or anything, it's it doesn't need any explanation. I'm gonna just let him do his thing, man. This is Chief Langley. Now this is from 2014, and even though a lot of this stuff isn't new to me per se, I thought about it when I looked at the live, and I'm like, damn, this shit is like 8 years old. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I started thinking, like, the nigga who's 21 or 20 right now, you know what I'm saying? I'm taking for granted what the nigga know, and when this shit dropped, this nigga was 12. You know what I'm saying? So I figured I'd go ahead and bring it back. You know what I'm saying? And just reiterate some things. If you are on Clubhouse, please share the room and share the club and join the club. Scroll up to the house, click on there, join the club. See if we can't run this up and get those truths out here. Let's check this out.
That there are some African Americans that are African, but from my take and my family and many others, we don't identify with having to come from Africa. I have no ties to Africa, none whatsoever, with the past 13 generations that I can name on my mother and father's side, my ancestors. I can't find any African in that link back to that time. So having said that, no. But what most people don't understand is Native American slavery. And Native American slavery was 200 to 300 years ahead before the first African hit these shores. Most folks don't understand that because they're given the perception that Indian owned slaves, and they show you the Cherokees owning slaves. But what they don't say, one of the major Cherokee slave owners, John Ross, they said was 1/8 or 1/64 Cherokee. So if you ask me, if I calculate that up, that is a Caucasian. According to his history, he could not even speak Cherokee. So folks must understand the dynamics of Caucasians being assembled among tribes and leading these tribes, and to understand that from that standpoint. Now, let's deal with 1682, and I'm going to start in Virginia. I spent the past 10 years studying colonial law as it deals with Native Americans and as it deals with reclassifications of race. So in 1682, Virginia decided to create two acts. In the act that we're going to deal with, Virginia said Native Americans or Indians and Africans will be placed under the umbrella of Negro. That started in Virginia. Negro was a Portuguese term used to describe indigenous people. So in the colonial time in America, you had Indian Negroes and you had African Negroes. Now, South Carolina adapted that and came up with something called the Negro Law of South Carolina. If you go and Google the Negro Law of South Carolina, you will find this congressional record. And it talks about Indians as well as African, free people of color, free African, free Indian. But what history doesn't also tells you, there were European Negroes, which were British slaves that were in South Carolina colonial times. That's a history not even talked about. So now we're going to go back and we're going to deal with the Indian Negroes who were in slavery. Because what happens today when historians start talking and activists start talking, and they're telling about African Americans in the 16, 17, 18, early 1900s, I have an issue with that because who are you talking about? Because that term did not exist. So you have to deal with the definition. So understanding this from a forensic standpoint, Negro in colonial times, you were talking about two different sets of people. You were talking about the Americans, the Indians, and you were talking about the Africans in slavery. And I use the term of like mixing fruit cocktails. Because after the slavery, everybody is colored or everybody is black. And please keep in mind, black is not a race. It is a color. It is looked upon as being a race, been accepted as being a race. It is a color. So folks really need to understand this. I deal with my necessity of who I am. I am a Yuchi Indian. And my grandmother and my grandaunt and my grandfather and my parents made sure I never forget it. I drank it day in and day out. My aunt will always say, we may be called black, but we didn't come from Africa. We from right here. The Yuchi Indians have been on the Savannah River for over 1,000 years, and the Ogeechee River. Thousands of years. When the first Europeans came and saw us, they say these people have the hue of the Ethiopian and the Egyptian. So what does that say?
So they were
Folks don't
comparing.
understand because they don't know the history of Native American slavery. And South Carolina, listen to me, brother, listen to me carefully. South Carolina has the most pristine records of Native American slavery and colonial race reclassification than any other state. Now, as I speak tonight, I speak from South Carolina. But keep in mind, Georgia was created out of South Carolina, and Alabama was created out of Georgia. So in the beginning, it was the Carolinas. But a lot of people don't realize, again, that a lot of the Spanish Moors and Morocco, who granted South Carolina their first charter as an independent sovereign state, helped colonize the Carolinas. South Carolina created a law in the 1600s called the Moor Sundry Act. And what this act did, it classified free African as white. So on the census, you got to be very careful because now I'm speaking to you from a forensic genealogist point of view. Your ancestors, depending on who they are, if you know who they are, may be coded as white on the census when you go back and do your genealogy search and you think you've got the wrong person. No, you have the right person if you have the location. Majority of them were slave owners. They held property.
What are one of the ways, Alonzo? Is that a reverb on my end?
Yeah, that's an echo.
Let me cut the gain down. What about now? Hello?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, Alonzo, why is this seems to be one of what you're talking about now seems to be one of the ways that there is so much confusion and animosity in the community by the way you're explaining it. Could that be the reason?
We're not the same people. We never were the same people. We were all combined, those that were slaves, those that were not. So after the end of slavery, let me explain something else about South Carolina. South Carolina when they came in to enslave, they conquered entire villages. Villages might have 5,000-10,000 people. Could be 40, 50, 60, maybe 100,000 acres. And those native villages became plantations. And those plantations today are townships and cities. In the early stage of Native American slavery, when they started bringing the Africans over, they didn't enslave them on the same plantation. That only happened at a different time. Native Americans enslaved the whole village. No one's going to run away. Now, what you got to understand, when you go do your research now, you have to look at what type of plantation this was. Was it a cotton plantation? Was it a rice plantation? Or a sugarcane plantation? 98% of your sugar plantations are your Native American slaves. Your cotton plantations are your African slaves. And your rice plantations. You have to investigate the plantation owner because they had to have permits. Did he have a permit to own Native American slaves? Did he have a permit to own African slaves? Or did he have a permit for British slaves, Scottish, and your Irish? These things are very key. Now, South Carolina did a whole lot of domestic slave trading with Native Americans, which means many of your ancestors ended up into Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and other places in the West Indies because that was a domestic trade. Well, you say, well, how is that a domestic trade and that's not part of the United States? I'm sorry, because in the 1600s, South Carolina had a governor named Governor Linton, Henry Linton. Henry Linton was the governor of Jamaica and South Carolina and governed certain parts of the Barbados because all of that was a part of the South Carolina province. That's why you won't find any slave trade direction coming from the United States going to the islands. It won't be on the transatlantic slave because it's domestic. So we have to understand that. So as you go do your genealogy search, that is very important. The other thing to keep in mind is to study the immigration maps. Where did the slave owner come from? Because in South Carolina had about 274 free African slave owners. So you have to understand, why wasn't this information given? You got to go back and look at Reconstruction. What were they trying to reconstruct? Then after Reconstruction, we get Jim Crow. We get laws that saying coloreds can't read, can't go to school, can't become policemen, can't be judges. Why? So you go into the public records and find out that before the Civil War, your ancestors may have been landowners. Your ancestors may have been slave owners and not vice versa. Your ancestors may have fathered white children and they were the slave masters, beside it being vice versa. These are things folks need to be concerned about because the average genealogist don't teach this. But I'm telling you this from a forensic standpoint. You look at your slave manifest. Your slave manifests are the logs that tells you where the slave's going, who owned the slave, what color is the slave. If you read the slave manifest, you will see slaves that are gold, that are yellow, that are black, that are white, that are brown, that are tan. So you need to keep in mind. So just so happened the color black stopped for some reason got to keep in mind with that, because these things are very, very important. Another thing that I teach and I tell people all the time, you got to be careful with the size of the slave ship. Folks don't really understand. Say, what do you mean by that, Langley? Okay, along the Savannah River, the channels are very narrow. I can swim from one side to the other in probably 2 minutes. So the channel is no more than about 25 or 30 yards. So you're not going to get no ship down there. You're going to get a boat because the draft is not going to carry it. And how many people on the little boat going down there? 25, 30 maybe? It wasn't no 200, 300, not in that area. So you have to question now, where did all these massive ships come from? Not mainland inside of America. No. May have been certain amount of size of ships going to the Caribbean. No. It's impossible. These are facts, because if you read the Slave Manifest, it tells you the capacity of the ships, the size of the ships. These things are very, very important. Of course, the cotton trade down in Buford, it tells you. And in Charleston, where are these slaves coming from? Why was cotton so important?
Shout out 10AC King. Appreciate that.
Wasn't for the Africans, wouldn't be no cotton here. So the British love cotton. And there were 7 African nations that are listed in South Carolina congressional records that had to do with slavery and participated and sent their people over here, as well as other tribes. And they sent people over here, these tribes who knew how to grow cotton, knew how to deal with iron, and very other tasks. These were specialists that they sent over here. You have to understand, slavery had nothing to do with black or white. It had to do with capitalism at that time. Jim Crow made it about black and white and racism. I checked the laws. I looked at the record to see how far. When you look to see how many people were hung. In slavery days, the numbers was very low because the slave was your property and they had to have insurance on slave and their cost. Your African slave was your Rolls Royce. But after slavery and in the years of Jim Crow, hanging and lynching, according to the record, expanded over 500 to 1,000%, depending on where you are. They wasn't trying to kill their slaves. So I have to question certain parts of roots and certain events that happened, because from a scientific perspective and what's in the colonial records, certain events didn't take place. Yes, slavery happened. It did. But the multitude of 5,000, 6,000 people, 400 or 500 people on a big slave ship coming down the Savannah River, no, you can't sit in an airplane for 8 hours without having to get up and stretch. So you mean to tell me you're going to chain someone down in a boat and cross the Atlantic for 4 months and their muscles are not being utilized? And they're going to get off the ship when they arrive and start picking cotton. Any medical doctor will tell you, I don't think about that.
Bro.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're with Chief Lonzo Langley from the UGMB tribe, and he's sharing some knowledge with us that we all need. Alonzo, why are the congressional records so important?
I would prefer everyone study your state colonial records, because these records deals with the statute law, and the reclassification of people. The Native American slaves that have been written out of history are written out of history due to slavery. It doesn't mean that the people don't exist. It means that they reclassified these people as Negroes and wrote these tribes out of existence. So where are the descendants of these tribes today? Many of them are under the umbrella of African American and don't know it because they haven't researched or know their history because they have been moved around a lot. My family didn't get out of the South till about 1970, 1975. They didn't go anywhere. They stayed in South Carolina and Georgia along the Savannah River, in Allendale County, in Barnwell County, in Georgia, in Spring County. That's where they are today. And they have been there for over a period of 600 years. Within our graveyards and cemeteries, they call them, are mounds. Those are my ancient ancestors. But that type of history don't get exposed because the concept is there's nothing down there but some Negroes and African Americans. But if you read South Carolina colonial law, South Carolina colonial laws will tell you what tribes, where they were located, who went into slavery. Now, there's one side of my family that was enslaved. There's another side that was not. I got a will of one of my grandfathers. He held several of his cousins in slavery to keep them from being sold to another plantation, whether in the Bahamas or Jamaica or outside of South Carolina or another plantation. They coded him as white because he converted to Christianity. And that's another thing folks need to realize. My family didn't do all that different name changing. My name went from Lawande to Kipahawa to Upichi to Langley and Roberts. So it's very easy for us to trace back. Because if I look at old colonial maps and land deeds, the original name of my ancestors is on there before they took on a Christian name. Now, I don't see my family as an isolated incident. I see my family as knowing who we were and didn't move around a lot. So when folks look at us, what do you mix with? What do you mean? Your hair is straight? Y'all mix with half white? No. Why I gotta be that? We're Yuchi Indians. This is who we are. No Native American tribe looks the same. Don't get shattered by that. What you see today and what you see on TV, Hollywood, ain't reality always. Don't buy into it. I call it the Barbie doll syndrome. Which doll is prettier? This is the one that we would show. Because there were Native Americans dark as Sambo, with straight hair, with big nose. All you have to do is go look in the archives and look at the old pictures from the 1900s on back to the 1800s. And see who these people look like. And you will find your people as your uncle, your aunt, your cousin, your grandmom, your granddaddy, being called Negro.
My sister and I went down to the Alabama archive yesterday in Montgomery, and we were just mind blown by the information that was down there, validating everything that you just said. And it was amazing. We were both in another world. And she was telling me about a picture she saw of a woman. The woman was 6 feet tall, and her husband was about 5'6", 5'7", and the look in their eyes, it's like you were saying earlier that we are different people. The look that they had in their eyes, the way they were looking, it was something like she'd never seen before. I'm wondering, Chief, I'm getting a lot of emails and I'm getting a lot of inquiries about this DNA. You know, everybody's paying for these DNA tests. Are those DNA tests valid? And if they are, what do they tell us?
I am a computer scientist by degree. I am also an engineer. I deal with black and white, and I deal with common sense. They have never really been scientific proven unless you've taken a DNA test for paternity. So if you want to take a DNA test and go dig up the oldest ancestor you have in your church or your family cemetery, by all means go take a DNA test, because you're doing it with your relatives. How is it possible for native people who converted to Christianity or took European names, where are these surnames based upon? Because it's European. I have I have a serious problem with it. Oh, sure, you'll be genetic cousins, but you're not blood cousins. Yes, they improvement. How is DNA going to tell me who my relative was 10,000 years ago? It's not a scientific fact. It's a guess, like Einstein's theory of relativity. It's never been proven. They take it to be fact. But you have people out there that live and die by DNA. I don't believe in it. I don't need it. I will never take one. Why should I take one if I can go back to 1725? Documentation on my family. I can go back another 60 years with oral stories. I'm not going to take one. I think it's laziness when people get into it. And what people really need to do, your ancestors, your great-grandma or your great-aunt or great-grandpa left you something. And when he said, my mother was an Indian, my daddy was an Indian, so what does make you think that you're not an Indian? The blood just died out and disappeared with you? This is how colonial law has come into play. Everyone needs to go research the census of 1930. Take my word for it. Go read it.
Well, what will we find in the census of 1930?
Race classification that is biased. And what I mean by that, if your mother was an Indian and your father was black, you were black.
But
if your mother was white and your father was an Indian, or vice versa, you were Indian or you were white. Any drop of black blood they claim made you black. But I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say it very carefully. Black is a color, not a necessity. So what most people don't understand, by not studying the racial laws, when those folks came out slavery to everybody under the umbrella of Negro, you don't know what your ancestors are, so you have to go by your oral stories or do some detective work by becoming a forensic genealogist and dissect the situation. How do you dissect it? I said it about 20 minutes ago. Learn the plantation. Learn what type of plantation it was. As a matter of fact, check the type of pottery that your ancestors made. You ain't gonna find no African making Native American pottery, or vice versa. He made the pottery of his tribe. Look at the baskets. See what the baskets are. Was it a Native American basket? African basket. What tribe? None of it is the same. It's comparable. It will tell you. These are key things folks miss, and you shouldn't. That's why I'm pointing these details out to you to look for. Luckily, I'm speaking tonight from my own experience. This is my story. There are a lot of natives out there. Why you always talk about history? Because it applies to me. This is my story. You went to Oklahoma. We didn't. And there's another thing. If you went to Oklahoma, the same skin tone you and I are now, or you lived on a reservation, on that reservation, you are what your tribe was. Whether you was Ute, Swanee, Cherokee, Choctaw, you're on the reservation, that's who you are. You're living out in the community, you're Negro or you're colored or you're white, depending on what community you lived in. If you're Native and you're living in a majority white community, they classified you as white. If you lived in a majority black community, they classified you as black. These are things folks are not understanding, but when you go back and look at the census enumerators, it tells you this. The best thing everybody can do that's listening to me right now is study the history of the census. Not the census, study the history of it. And when you study the history of it, go and look at the state and local statute codes of laws that govern race. Because if you find a community with 500 musties or 500 mulattoes, what do you mean by musty? Musty is what they call a Native American mixed with an African. That offspring is a musty. If an Indian is mixed with white, they called them mulatto back then. These are different words and phrases they're playing with. Folks don't understand it.
Chief, what was the purpose of marching people to Oklahoma?
Land, bottom line. And let me tell you something. There are more resistance with going to Oklahoma than the books really want to tell. The Seminoles fought a 50-year war. If you read Jackson's diary, I love to read diaries of these people. And Jackson's diary was the Seminole War, his classification of that, and said, oh my Lord, this is a Negro war. That's in his diary. So we have to understand something here. Let's take the term maroon. Black and red equal maroon. This is how it's taught to me. So the natives and the Indians in South Carolina that ran away in the swamp and had offspring, they called them maroons. This is in South Carolina congressional records now. Now let's talk about the Black Seminole. We're talking a totally different person now. Because the Black Seminole, according to the congressional records, is a former slave who ran away and lived among the Indians. Now when we get down to Florida, we have Black Seminoles, we have Maroons, they done grouped everybody together. So now they say Black Indians. Well, how so? When you got a mixture of a native and an African. Another word for that you will hear your grandmother say is Blackfoot, because Blackfoot is the offspring of a native and an African. That's not the Blackfoot tribe. That was the derogatory word that was used. There wasn't no Blackfoot down in the South, not in South Carolina and Georgia. So your parents could be right, and your parents are right saying they're native, but they're wrong by saying Blackfoot and Cherokee because these tribes wasn't in that area. So you have that right. So what do you have to do now to clear the situation? What you have to do now is sit down and start studying old colonial maps. Look at tribal territory maps and follow those maps back up. Don't start now and work your way back. Go to the earliest time of invasion and follow the colonies and watch how the land division changes. Land doesn't go nowhere. The name of places change. You will identify with the area that your tribe was most dominant in or that tribal town. So now you know what tribe you descend from. It's not mathematics. It's not hard. It's taking the time out to detail and study your history. And that's why I'm here tonight to give you this information that has been in my family for years, whether they talked about it or not. You're wasting your time, some of you, to go look across the border, across the water to Africa, and your ancestors ain't never been no way but where they are. Most older generation, 3 generations back, if you were from the back boondocks, you didn't migrate out. See? My family, a lot of them might get upset for me saying this, but this is common among Native American people. This is part of my story. We all intermarried. I got cousins marrying cousins. 3 generations back, we share the same grandmother and grandfather. 2 more generations back from that, there it goes again. But when you get out of your tribalness, these type things happen. You're no longer communicating. You don't know who's who. Somebody says, well, those are the Williams over there. That's a different set. I tell you what, you better go back 2 or 3 generations and look and see if it's a separate set. Same people. Because you've been cut off.
Chief,
it's very important to understand this. Go ahead, man.
What would you say to the people who are adamant that they are from Africa? But when they are asked when they're from Africa, where they're from, they don't know. They don't know.
I would say, if that's what they want to embrace, and as the old Christian song says, you die and your soul be lost, ain't nobody fault but you. I am not going to preach because some people are not going to get it because they embrace that. That's what they want to be. That's fine. That's your perspective. That's what you should do. But don't hinder me. I'll take the concept. Yes, everybody descends from Africa. How many thousands of years you talking about? 50? 100? 200,000 years? The word Africa is no more than about 600 years old that came into play around the same time. America Vespucius decided to call America America. And on the old maps, it was called Byland. So the Roman Emperor Africanus, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, named Africa. But there's so much discussion now, that may not be the location. So I deal with history that deals with 600-700 years back. Let's just deal with that. Because folks going on the old myths and 10,000 years and 20,000 years. No. That ain't going to do me no good. I accept that. But in the last 500 years, or the last 600 years, or the last 700 years, I descend from America. I am home. I went to Africa one time on a mission with the Army Corps of Engineers. I was working on a telehealth project. We stopped in Singapore. We was traveling to Singapore because we had to go to Asia. And I'm sitting in the lobby. And I walked up, and this African said to me, "Cotton picker maybe, African absolutely not." Did you hear what I just said?
Cotton picker maybe. African
Cotton picker maybe, African absolutely not. They know their people like I know my people.
Today is Thursday, January 23rd, 2014, African American and African Radio. We're joined by Chief Langley from the Yuchi tribe. Chief, earlier we talked about the Racial Integrity Act. Could you talk to the audience about what the Racial Integrity Act is and how it applies to us?
The Racial Integrity Act of 1924, I have some friends that are from Virginia. Oh, they can explain that more beautifully than I can because they lived it. But this is what I'm going to tell you is according to what I've read, I've discussed with my colleagues. Dr. Plecker decided to reclassify people in Virginia who was native to say that there are no more Indians in the state of Virginia. So he classified them as colored or Negro and wrote them out of existence. Now, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 brings about and expresses the one drop blood rule. You got to understand this. That's why your mother could be native or your father could be native and one parent's black, you're black. You can have your great grandfather an African and everybody else was 6th generation up as native, which you done married a complete African out. In that many generations, you are still considered black. But remember, black is a color, not a race. White, on the other hand, native and white will equal native or white. Oklahoma passed a law, Supreme Court law, many years ago, only about 100 years ago, that all Indians are white. The law benefited them. The Dawes Roll benefited them. And you have to be very careful with the Dawes Roll, because those names on the Dawes Roll are common and may not apply to you. There are too many groups going around pushing this, and people are getting played. And I'm telling you from my own experience, the Dawes does not apply to you unless you know your family was in Oklahoma and they came back. You really don't need it. You really don't. What you need to do is understand your history. There are tribes out there that are in existence that don't even use the Dawes Roll because it don't apply to them. What you need to understand is the racial reclassification codes in your colonial state that has reclassified you. Get yourself in the mood of start studying Native American law within that state and say, hey, no, my people were reclassified. This is who I am, and I can prove it. And when you go back and look at the congressional law and look at the census, you'll understand it. Most folks go online and deal with Ancestry.com because the federal census every 10 years. I like to use something when I assist people called Family Search, because Family Search deals with a 5-year census and a 2-year census. And those 5-year census is states. 2-year census is your counties. People moving in and out. You will find your people a lot better from what I have seen with family search. Because it's going to deal with short timelines and going to deal with the little local code houses, not the federal. A lot can happen in 10 years. People move around a lot. People may have changed their names. And be careful with that on the census too. Because your ancestor's name might be spelled one way and you're looking at it a different way, or the last name might be first and the first name is last. They're the same people. I have seen this hundreds of times. Hundreds of times. So you can't overlook that. Your grandparents, your ancestors have given you a roadmap. When they say Indian, then folks say, I don't want to use the word Indian, that is indigenous. I'm going to take it with me all the way to the bank. Because that's how I identify my people. My people had to convert back from colored to Negro to back to Yuchi. In today's time, those that are not tribal, they have to convert back from African American to colored to Negro to Yuchi. Because that's who we are.
9910 area code calling. Caller, did you have a question?
No, I didn't. I was just calling. I thought it was just a listening.
Okay. Chief, you sent me a email last week about in North Carolina, where this county, Franklin County, North Carolina, burned some records, some 160-year-old documents. Intentionally, they destroyed these records. Why would a county do that?
Opening up Pandora box, if I can use that phrase, because those documents will show who these major landowners are and who are the heirs. And it would have brought about a serious rut for the state in regards to heirs reclaiming their property. They didn't want to deal with that. It may have bankrupt North Carolina. So why would they bury it? You got 160-year-old documentation. You know how many genealogy brick walls that would have prevented, brought about solutions, but they choose to burn them.
Well, Chief, the question I have is, with us claiming that we're Africans, with us claiming that we're Moors, with us claiming that we're Hebrew Israelite, with us claiming that we're Muslim, doesn't those claims that we make on all these other nations around the world, doesn't that make what is ours here, doesn't that nullify that?
I'm going to take one of those that you used, and I'm going to deal with it, and that is the Moor. And the reason I'm going to address the Moors is from a South Carolina congressional perspective and relationships that South Carolina had with Morocco. Now, I'm not going to bash these guys, but I'm going to give you South Carolina perspective. If they're claiming sovereignty in the United States, they don't have it because they're not indigenous to this area. You are in.
All right, we're just gonna take a little break right here, a little pit stop, shout, because we need you to hit them likes, and you know what? We ain't even doing bows and arrows. We doing goddamn diamonds. So if you learning something from this and Chief Langley dropping jewels like I know he is, put some diamonds in the chat, man. You know we got to keep that chat goddamn crackling. Keep that algorithm up, man, so we could get this shit out here. You already know, Shadow Band Clan. Make sure you go subscribe to Aboriginal America on YouTube. You know what I'm talking about. And if you're the Clubhouse type, you can also join the club on Clubhouse, Aboriginal America. You know what I'm talking about? You already know how we rocking, man. Peace to the tribes. We're going to continue it on, man. We just had to take a little break because I know everybody's stuck because he dropping all them jewels. That's why ain't nobody saying shit. You know what I'm saying? Ain't all that talking. That shit be when a nigga disagree. You know what I'm saying? A motherfucker disagree with a motherfucker, nigga be like, man, chat. Ain't nothing to chat about. Cause this nigga dropping jewels. You know what I'm talking about? And you know, it's a lot of niggas out here still think they're African. You know what I mean? And you know, think they was slaves. Think they ain't never gonna have shit. You know what we say about that.
But change your motherfucking mindset. You wanna know why you ain't got shit? Cause you ain't thinking about shit. I come out the door every day with this shit on my mind. I'm gonna give me a bag. Fuck wrong with you? I'm gonna give me some cash. Change your motherfucking mindset, man. You think pennies, you get pennies. Bitch, I'm thinking dollars.
And Morocco, for one. Because every year, the Sultan of Morocco, either the Prince of Morocco, either he comes or an agent of his come to South Carolina in a ceremonial and inspect the South Carolina National Guard. In the 1700s, the Negroes who were free, South Carolina passed the Suntree Act to label those Moors as white. So they're white on the census. But what a lot of people are not understanding, the Moors at that time was a society like the Freemasons. To be honest with you, a lot of Masonic stuff come from the Moors, but that's another conversation to have. They're not sovereign. Not here. Then why are they constantly going to jail? Morocco doesn't recognize them. What those cats need to do is go stop reading some of these books and go look into the colonial laws that identify who the Moors are in South Carolina.
Now, why is South Carolina, Chief, why is South Carolina so important to what you're talking about? What makes South Carolina the leading?
Because Carolinas were colonized by the Moors in the early days. That's another big part of history. Study the Spanish Moors. The Moors' conquest of North America. Read that book. And go to South Carolina and look at the Moors from the congressional record. Look at the state papers on the Moors. That's why. A lot of the Moors, especially the Spanish Moors, invaded this continent with Columbus and also De Soto. De Soto had Spanish Africans with him on his Native American raids. Go read the book of Chesto Menendez. You think it's Spanish, but if you go and read it, you will find out he was a Spanish African. He was a Moor. I'm not friends with the Moors from that perspective. I know their history. You came in raping and enslaving Native American people in South Carolina. It's in the congressional records. They need to check their history on that. Well, I ain't never read it. Well, go read South Carolina Congressional Record. There's a reason why, a very good reason why, South Carolina decided to classify Negroes who were slave owners as Moors and give them the status of being white. It is public information. You have a lot of these cats take information and then put their own spin on it. That's very dangerous. That's why I don't like reading a lot of books from a lot of authors, because you got to understand, is he pro this or is he pro that? Because he's going to write it in a biased perspective. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand exactly what you're saying.
Those cats have no sovereignty here in America. Not in South Carolina, unless they come from Morocco. Because that's who granted South Carolina their first charter. Morocco.
Wow.
It's public information.
Chief,
You will do your... Go ahead.
Chief, could you talk to us about the treaties?
There's a treaty of 1866. Now, the Treaty of 1866 talks about Negroes. Now, what I want everyone to understand, in 1866, that was after the Indian removal, and the removal was between 1832 and 1836. So the 1866 treaty, which deals with the 5 civilized tribes and the freemen. But check this out. It was an African Creek chief, Kowtow, that initiated this treaty for the Creeks. A month ago, I had dinner in California with his 9th generation grandson, Perryman. Like Perryman kept his history, I have my history. We had a meeting of the Creek in the UT in California. It was a wonderful 2 hours. That doesn't apply unless you know your family was in Oklahoma and they came back. So having to jump on that wagon and say the 1866 treaty applied to me and you haven't been tribal. Well, if you were tribal and came back, yes, you need to be looking at the Freedmen Bureau of those 13 colonies, or those southern states, that deals with that 40 acres and a mule that was lost. You need to deal with the defranchised people. Who are these defranchised people? Who are the people who was reclassified? Who are the refugees? Because if you read the Freeman Rule, it talks about the refugees, the freemen, and abandoned land. Well, who are the refugees? The Native Americans? And the Africans? That are under Negro? That come from separate plantations? Unless they were enslaved with these Native American tribes, and at that point, the Africans and the natives were together. But in South Carolina, it is documented that Native Americans and Africans, not all were on the same plantation, if you look at the timelines. So you know you got a mixture of people who are different. It's a fact. Check the records. I'm not going to give you what a historian gives you. I'm going to give you where the historian gets his information. Go to the congressional records. Leave that treaty alone, because what you're going to do, you're really going to embarrass yourself. Like a lot of people I know, well, my grandmother shows up on the Dawes Roll. Were your grandmother in Oklahoma? No. Well, you better search the Dawes and see where these events were taking place at the time, because that may be a common name, and most time it is. But people don't realize when many people from the South migrated to Oklahoma, when they got to Oklahoma, they named the places in Oklahoma the same names of the places in Georgia and Alabama. My grandmother that raised me from 3 days old, born 1912 in Stillwell, Georgia, Ruby Lee Langley. There's a Ruby Lee Langley in Stillwell, Oklahoma, born 1912. Wow. I'm going to tell you two things happen. Either there's some identity fraud going on, or there's another Ruby Langley out there in Oklahoma. But since I'm not using the Dawes Roll for any BIA benefits, I'm going to leave it alone, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to deal with the racial reclassification. Or you reclassified my people, disenfranchised them, placed them in Native American slavery, called them Negro, and they are not. I'm going to approach that from a South Carolina perspective and deal with them on a state issue.
Talk to him, Chief.
My folks were reclassified. We have a tribe. We had one from day one. A lot of people don't realize, okay, well, Langley, where did you have your tribe? Our tribe was here. Where do you have your services? In the church. Because when South Carolina and Georgia and many other southern states decided that there were no more Indian people in the state, and they called them colored, these tribes, these clans had their meetings in the churches. So a chief became a deacon or officer in the church. Sometimes the preacher.
Talk to him.
But most times the medicine man became the preacher.
Talk to him.
Something a lot of people miss, and that is when you used to see your granduncle or your grandfather or great put on that little church hat and stick that little feather in the side, that was a sign. That was his chief hat.
Damn.
That's a part of history that's overlooked, and many of y'all in the black community can relate to seeing that.
Hell yeah. Hold
Because
on.
that's
We
what
bringing
my
that back.
ancestors did. Daddy always gives me my chief hat.
We bringing that back. That's a fact.
Why is he wearing the feather? Symbolic. This is common for both sides. These clans had their meetings.
Yeah, you know what, y'all, like, this shit been right in our face the whole time, like everything. But it's got to a point where, you know what I'm saying, like, the people before us, you know what I'm saying, our granddaddies knew why the feather was in their hat. So they wasn't pressed about it. You know what I'm saying? Shit deep, man. I digress. Hey, man, take a moment to share the stream. If you're on YouTube, you know what I'm saying? If you're on Clubhouse, share the room. We're going to get back into it, man. Chief dropping jewels. You know what I'm talking about? And you know what we doing.
Giving you more of what you hoping for. You ain't hoping in the Lord, huh? You hoping in vain, material, superficial shit. That's why you can't see me, house niggas.
So a chief became a deacon or officer in the church. Sometimes the preacher, but most times the medicine man became the preacher. See, something a lot of people miss, and that is when you used to see your granduncle or your grandfather or great put on that little church hat and stick that little feather in the side, that was a sign. That was his chief hat. That's a part of history that's overlooked, and many of y'all in the black community can relate to seeing that. Because that's what my ancestors did. Daddy always, this is my chief hat. Why is he wearing the feather? Symbolic. This is common, but folks don't know the history.
Chief, you talked about earlier. You were talking earlier about the AME Church. Could you let the audience in on that, please?
Oh yeah, we can go dig in that one. That's my baby. Oh man.
Chief dropping jewels.
Oh yes. There was a church in Scriven County, Georgia, Asbury, named after Francis Asbury. Francis Asbury was a disciple of John Wesley. John Wesley brought Methodism to Georgia and to the United States. Francis Asbury would ride through Indian country, converting Native Americans to Christianity. As a result of that, we have the Colored Methodist Church. But a lot of people don't realize the Colored Methodist Church was the Indian church. Then you had the White Methodist Church. Then you had the African Church. So when South Carolina and Georgia decided there are no more Indians in the state, the Indians had to make a choice. Either they were going to consolidate with the white Methodists or consolidate with the African Methodists. So a lot of the natives identified with the Free Africans and joined the African Methodist Church. So Asbury AME Church in Savannah, Georgia, that my family has been going to since the beginning of time because my ancestors helped establish that church. And it became from Asbury Colored Church to Asbury AME Church. Now, Richard Allen in Philadelphia, in Delaware, in Maryland, is credited to starting the AME Church. But what folks need to understand, and I ain't taking nothing from Richard Allen, he was a disciple of Francis Asbury that gave them the Episcopal Charter. But Richard Allen, according to his diaries, he never traveled south because he feared he would be put in slavery. But according to documents that I've read, even his mother was Native American. Don't quote me on it. That's what I've read. So a lot of the traditions, I give you a tradition. Homecoming, Harvest Day. That's Green Corn Festival. If you go to Asbury, you'll see folks doing the Holy Ghost dance, and look at some of the tribes in Oklahoma, you will think they're doing the Ghost dance. Why is that? Because there were Native American people in Asbury that brought those traditions inside of the church. And when we couldn't practice it outwardly, they were practiced inside of the church. So the church became an institution to keep the tribe alive and going. That is a fact. Anybody else tell you otherwise, they don't know the history or they're trying to disregard it. But they cannot tell me about Asbury AME Church in Savannah, Georgia.
One of the things that we hear about in the community, or that's very relevant in the community when talking about the females, are what are called red bone. Could you tell us about what a red bone is?
There was a tribe up in North Carolina of mixed race people. There's a congressional book out on Native Americans of Native Americans of North Carolina. Excellent book. It was written back in the 1800s. If you don't have it, I will send you the link. And it talks about the characteristics of the red bone, which were a mixed race people of native, African, and white. They called them red bones. They are known today as a tribe called the Shura. Some are called Lumbee. Many of the red bones were sent to Louisiana according to the domestic migrations from South Carolina to Louisiana. That's where the term red bone comes from. They didn't just pick that out. That was a tribe. Well, enough of them, they decided to start calling folks red bone. You see them all the time. Me and you grew up with that. That's a red bone.
Facts. Still.
Tribes that are written out of history are people who descend from slavery. Their descendants are still here. They may not assemble as a tribe anymore, but those descendants are here because they wrote them out of history. But as soon as people identify who they are, they need to go back into their tribes.
Area code 225. Did you have a question for the chief?
Actually, I'm just calling in, just listening in and trying to, I guess, just get more education or just learn and see what you guys are talking about. I was referred by Dr. Leonora Netwe in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Okay, so what are you thinking about what you're hearing so far?
I actually just called in and I haven't heard anything. So I've only been on for not even a minute, just 40-something seconds.
Any other callers waiting on hold? Did anybody have any questions of what you heard about so far?
I'm on the line, Carrie. Tennille.
Tennille, did you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, Chief, what information do you see at this time that is viable that the African American community knows at this time?
Can you repeat that question or rephrase it? Because I'm not understanding what exactly.
As you look around America, as you look around the communities and what's going on in America, I'm talking about from all four corners of America, what is the most important thing that the people who call themselves African Americans, what is the most important thing that they need to know? Or how would you tell them to search their families? How would they go about that?
First of all, I would say go to your state archives and start studying the congressional laws which govern race of that state in colonial times. South Carolina has the Negro Law. Virginia has the Racial Integrity Law, Racial Integrity Act. I am quite sure other states did exactly the same thing and may have patterned their laws and their statute laws after Virginia or South Carolina. But there's a fascinating thing about Virginia that's rarely told that I found in the Virginia to the southern states migration. Virginia had, in 1690, they expelled 60,000 free Africans. Those free Africans in Virginia went south. Many of them ended up in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Mainly the Carolinas, because it is known the Carolinas was colonized by the Moors. And at that time, there were more black free slave owners in the Carolinas than the Virginians. Now, so say, Chief, where you get this information from? Go search the timeline. The timelines of colonial migrations. If you don't have it, get with the caller. I will give it to him, and he will email it to you.
We're here with Chief Langley from the Yuchi tribe on the Savannah River. Chief, talk to us about the male warrior. What is the purpose of the male warrior, and how could he be utilized, and how could he be a force to reckon with in America today?
Learn his history. Learn the knowledge of self. Whether he be African or whether he be Indian, learn who you are. And respect your ancestors by knowing who they were, because the name that you carried them. They're in your DNA. They're in your blood. This is a spiritual journey. They're ancestors of mine. I never met one day in my life, but I saw them transform themselves in the form of a ghostly image, in the spirit to me. This is a spiritual walk.
Hello?
Yes, caller, you had a question?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, I actually have two questions. The first question is that, is the chief aware of the particular tribes that were in Robeson County during the 1750 census? Which particular tribes, if he's aware, in North Carolina during the 1750 census there?
People who are listening online, people who are calling in to Skype listening online, could you cut down your noise in the background, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Please.
Hold on.
Chief, did you get that question?
There are several tribes that were along the border. The Catawba is one that was on both sides of the water. The Shura is another one. The Wakamas, the Shakoras. There are many different tribes. I can send you the book that was written in the early, after the Yamasee War. I give you an example. Let's take the Tuscarora. The Tuscarora is in in North Carolina. But a lot of folks don't know, when you go search the ancient records, the Tuscarora is listed in Beaufort, South Carolina. So you have a lot of migration of tribes due to Native American slavery and due to the planters and very other colonial people coming in, pushing the tribes north or pushing the tribes south. But I do have access to that information, and I can send that information to you. I know I'm familiar more with tribes in South Carolina or Low Country, because I tend to stick within the rim of my area when it comes to identifying tribes. But I do have that information for you.
Okay. I think you're my friend on Facebook. You can send it right there to me.
Carter, you had another question?
Okay. My other question was, when searching, is it a common pattern for? I believe it is though. A common pattern for indigenous people or natives to be identified first as Indian, and then later on in the census it progressed to colored, and then black, and so on. Is that the case?
Yes.
Thank you.
Caller,
then I know I'm on the right track.
Let me tell you something. Many people will say, don't use the word Indian, don't use the word Negro. I'm going to tell you what. When it comes to the law, and it comes to reparations, when it comes to a land claim, you need to identify with those names, because that is history. And what is written in the history books is what's going to identify who your people are.
Tribe.
Absolutely. I understand.
What you don't want to do, you do not want to lose your chain connection to the identity of what your ancestors were reclassified as, because you are an extension of them today. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
I'm speaking from a legal perspective. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Caller, thanks for your call. Chief Langley, could you give us your contact information, your email address, or whatever you want the listeners to have?
They can do heritage, HERITAGE, at SRDEUCHEE tribe.org.
Okay, listeners, you have any other thing, all the document to you with no problem. Area code 205. Could you have a question for the chief?
Actually, I do. Good evening, Chief Langley and Carrie. I appreciate the information that you are providing this evening. What I would like to know is, what difference does it really make if we are African, if we are Indian, if we are Negro? And you probably covered all of this, but before you go, I just want you to give that to us just one more time. What difference really does it make what we are classified as? Thank you, and I'm going to mute my phone and listen.
You're killing me. Next caller.
I'm going to answer that question.
Oh, it looks like we've lost the chief. He's coming back right now. Sorry about that, Chief.
Are we still on the air?
You were still on the air. Sorry about that.
I'm going to answer that question from my own life and experience. That is, I'm a Yuchi Indian. I'm a member of the Yuchi Indian tribe. I reside on my Aboriginal land. I have an Aboriginal land claim because I'm an indigenous descendant of Yuchi Indian. A African is not, unless he is part Yuchi. If you don't have a land claim, if you're not tied to a tribe, then do not claim your Indianness. Embrace your Africanness. But do not walk in a Native American meeting claiming you are Native American wearing a daisheki. So it's a choice. Totally up to you. I am a Yuchi American Indian. That is who I am. That's what I live. That's what I breathe. That's where my ancestors are. And my family has taken it to the point of taking it legally that we have had our ancestors that are past legally changed back to who they are. So their deaths and their birth certificates have been amended. Some of them have been amended without having an amended code on it. That
Chief,
is
what
in
is
the
a
honor
chief? What
of
is
my
a chief?
ancestors. Go ahead.
Chief, what is an amended code?
When you modify a death certificate or birth certificate, and they put amended on it. They said it was changed and it was authorized to be changed, or it could be changed without having any amendment on it. It all cares on how you want to embrace your ancestors. I paid tribute to mine. That's who they are. That's who they were. And that's who I legally had it changed to. We were able to do that by knowing who we are. That's who we always have been. When my mother died in my house, the first thing the coroner asked me, what tribe is she from?
Any other callers on hold, or do you have any questions for the chief?
Hey, could I add on to that?
Yes, sir, Rick.
Yeah, to add on to what he was saying to the lady, here's another thing. If you can't trace your ancestry back to Africa, and they send you back to Africa, where you gonna go? I mean, you should have, if you can't trace your ancestry back there, you shouldn't even be thinking about that. And a question that I have for the chief is, there's a lot of people out there, that are trying to find their ancestry and all these things and look at all these so-called treaties and all these things. Are there any, code words in these treaties that would, let us know, or in these documents that let us know that they're exactly talking about us? Hello?
Chief,
Hello?
did you get that question?
What was the question?
Rick, can you ask it again?
Oh, I was saying, a lot of the people out there listening, they're trying to, trying to find their heritage, and they're trying to look into all these treaties, and they probably get mixed up with a lot of the things that they're looking for. Are there any code words or things that we should be looking for in these particular documents that would let us know that they're definitely talking about us?
Let me say this. Those of us that didn't migrate to Oklahoma or any other place out west, there were treaties that were signed prior. And according to your state, those treaties may still be in effect. According to your state's constitution. Some states are still aligned with constitutions during the British era. It all depends. Some folks in Oklahoma will say that don't apply. They are in Oklahoma.
The information you give is so simple, so direct, so to the point. Why does it seem like this is so hard for us to understand and get?
Because it has never been taught. And when you go on a genealogy search, no one thinks to look at colonial law and look at racial classification because they never knew it existed. I am a forensic genealogist. I teach this. I have been studying it for over 10 years. It is very effective, very easy, along with navigation of maps. Here's an example. Your ancestors shows up on the census in 1850. That tells you right now, your ancestors wasn't enslaved. Secondly, if they show up on 1850 in the census as a farmer, go look at the congressional records and to see what did they allow the Indians to do. What trade were the Indians involved with at that time? They were farmers. If you find any documentation with your family name on it, past 1850, they were not a slave. Don't let nobody fool you for that one. They are indigent servants. That means there were Africans that came over. But the majority of the Africans that came to South Carolina were free. Remember, Virginia expelled 60,000 free Africans around 1690. 60,000 people. What does that tell you?
So, Chief,
People, go ahead. People need to study the congressional records. Get out of these history books.
Chief, why do you say get out of the history books? Because that's where a lot of us, that's where we like to claim that we brag on what we read out of these books. Why are the books so unimportant, and why haven't they really helped us?
Because they're biasly written and they omit history. Omitting history is worse than telling a lie. You left it out, so it didn't exist. So I can't find it. I'm sorry. I've had so many white people get upset with me. We were never slaves. The hell you wasn't. You better check South Carolina colonial records. The British sent 75,000 of y'all over here who were Scottish and Irish. It's in the congressional records. Oh, they were indentured service and not slaves. You're right.
What's the
then
difference?
How come when you go back, everybody that's on this call right now, go to the census site and look up the census of 1790, and the 1790 census will tell you they did not take names in the 1790 census. It tells you the first question it asks, how many free white men in the household? Why are you going to say free if nobody wasn't enslaved? How many free white women in the household? Why are you going to say free if somebody wasn't enslaved? How many free persons? Now you're talking about the natives.
So basically what you're saying is also is not what is written, but it's like you said, what's omitted.
It is what's omitted. Go look at the census, study the census history of 1790.
Chief,
They did not record any names. If you want to find your family, listen to me carefully. If you want to find your family beyond 1790, you have to search land deeds, land boundary grants, land warrants. You will find your people. They're there, owning land.
So it's not as far fetched if it's not as far fetched because I think a lot of us, that's why we go straight to Africa, because I know my grandmother and grandfather never Africa, they would look at you like you was crazy. So doing what you just said, that would show a lot of us that that isn't the case.
If they go to our website, www.srbuttribe.org, and if they take the time while they're on the phone listening right now and go to that website, and when you get to that website, scroll down till you get to the United States Census number 44 that says from 1850 to 1930, select that. When you select that, there's an icon that says 1850. Click on the 1850 icon. 1860 census is going to come up. Scroll down to the bottom, there's 1790. Click on 1790. 1790 says this is the history of the United States Census. In 1790, Assistant Marshal listed the name in 1790, the Assistant Marshal listed the name of each head of household, asked the following question. Question 1, the number of free white male age, under 16 or 16 and upward. The next question, number of free white females. The other question, the number of other free persons. The last question, the number of slaves. Europeans were slaves in this country, especially in South Carolina. And not all of these African Americans were slaves. They were slave owners. Read the book, The Black Slave Masters of South Carolina Low Country.
Rick, did you have a question?
No, not right now.
People have been confused. They have been lied to. History have been omitted. And what it does, it plays with the psychological impact, which also has an effect on your economic and social status. If you think your family has never done nothing, you ain't gonna do nothing, and you live under a cloud. There is no cloud for me. It is beyond the sky, infinite. They did not lie when some of the African and kings and queens came over here, but it was a handful of them who were slave owners.
So you're saying the African queens and kings that came over here, they were owning some of the indigenous Indians over here?
Exactly. It's a fact. It's written in the congressional records.
So Chief, how many would the congressional records tell you how many Africans did come over here as slaves?
I tell you what, if you go to the Moral Sultry Act of South Carolina, it tells you the 7 African nations that engaged in the slave trade. Many of them were living in what is now known as Edgefield, South Carolina. And in Edgefield, South Carolina, in the 1700s, it talks about the Egyptians. The Egyptians were quoted as free Moors. Matter of fact, I'm going to send it to you right now, and you read it off to the people.
Economics in our communities are in bad shape, and we produce nothing in this country. All we do is consume. and some of the information he's given, it will connect us back to the land. It'll probably connect you back to some of the industries that your people were on previously. And this is definitely what needed, especially for the young people. Chief, where are you sending that email? I mean that link.
Actually, I'm giving it to you. See, can you get a couple of calls? Give me about 2 minutes to locate this one.
Okay. People waiting on the line who are listening, do you have any questions for the chief?
I do have a question.
Please go ahead. Where you calling from? What's your name and where you calling from?
My name is Coco. I'm calling from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I have a two-part question. My first question is, I heard him mention that I can go to the archives building to research my history of being in Louisiana. If you have any knowledge, where can I go to find out exactly more about my history? I do know that for a fact that I have Indian in my blood, and as well as Creole in my blood, just by seeing past family members and stuff like that. And my second part of my question is, I am a natural hairstylist, and behind the chair, I try to talk to my stylist a lot about, culture and, learning about themselves and, just getting to know their history and stuff like that. So I'm just asking a general question, what is it that I can do now as I'm learning more to be able to speak to my clients and to my people, just give me any type of information, empowerment on, how to go about reaching my people a little bit better than what I have been.
Once you find the information in the state archives go look up the colonial laws of Louisiana. Once you find those laws, start looking into statute laws and race classification laws. Once you have that information, point them to a source. The worst thing you could do is have somebody tell you about something, but can't give you an affirmed source where they got it from. So authors are always biased. Somebody always, I don't like the way this guy writes. But if you go to the congressional records and get the information where the author gets the information from, you have given them the source.
Caller, you had a two-part question, right?
Yeah, the second part was, I think he kind of basically hit both questions. Once I go to the state archives and look up the statute laws and race classification, that'll give me a little bit better insight on how I can go about continue doing what I do as a natural hairstylist and trying to reach my people, talking to them. So if I'm not mistaken, I think you did answer the question, unless you have something else you would like to add to it.
We have Heritage Club meetings, and we have them on Tuesday night and sometimes Saturday mornings. And what we do, we teach the history. We also provide assistance with tracing your ancestry. You come to a couple of meetings, join, you will have access to genealogists, tribal genealogists. You will have access to forensics genealogists. You will have access to historians, anthropologists, archaeologists. We have all of them that align with us, that will help you. It's not going to cost you $200. It's not going to cost you $100. We charge $25 a year for our membership. We will help you.
And ladies and gentlemen, let me add, I've been following, the chief called me up from a show last week, and the information he has given me in the last week is more than I've learned in my 12 years of going to kindergarten up to the 12th grade. The information is easy to read, it's easy to find. He will walk you through it. And after reading a tenth of what he sent you, you will be looking at yourself in a whole different way. So please contact them. Chief, can you give your email and information again? Now, is this what you want me to read? The black slave holders, free blacks?
What does the title say?
Black slave holders, free black slave masters in South Carolina, 1790 to 1860.
Exactly. Before that, there's another one I put said the petition of the free Moors of South Carolina. Open
Yes,
that
sir.
document up. That is a congressional record. Read what it says.
Do you want me to read the highlighted area?
Once you open the document up, it says South Carolina State Records, the State Records of South Carolina, Journals of the House of Representatives. This is where they need to go in their particular state to get this information.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, the State Records of South Carolina. So what do you want me to read?
Scroll down where it says 20 January 1790, page 363.
By order of the House, Jacob Reed, Speaker, ordered that the message be sent to the Senate and that Mr. Hugh Rutledge and Mr. Dees do carry the same. The House proceeded to the second reading of a bill to incorporate the Baptist Church on Horns Creek in Edgefield County, state of South Carolina, when a motion was made and seconded that the bill be changed into an ordinance, which was agreed to. The ordinance then read through and agreed to. Ordered that the ordinance be sent to the Senate and that Mr. Simpkins and Colonel Anderson do carry the same. And then the House adjourned till tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Scroll down. You see the blue section where it says a petition? Read that.
A petition was presented to the House from sundry free Moors, subjects of the Emperor of Morocco, and residents in this state, praying that in case they should commit any fault amenable to be brought to justice, that they as subjects to a prince in alliance with the United States of America may be tried under the same laws as the citizens of the state would be liable to be tried, and not under the Negro Act, which was received and read.
There you go. Now, go down a little bit further where it says Clarinda.
Clarinda humbly sheweth that your petitioners some year past had the misfortune, while fighting in the defense of their country, to be captured with their wives and made prisoners of war by one of the kings of Africa, that a certain Captain Clark had them delivered to him on a promise that they should be redeemed by the Emperor of Morocco's ambassador then residing in England, in order to have them returned to their own country. Instead of which he brought them to this state and sold them for slaves. Since that period they have by the greatest industry been enabled to purchase their freedom from their respective masters, and now prayeth your honorable House that as freeborn subjects of a prince now in alliance with these United States, that they be not considered as subjects of this state now in force, called the Negro Law. So they don't want to be subject to the Negro Law. But if they should unfortunately be guilty of any crime or misdemeanor against the laws of the land, that they may have a just trial by a lawful jury, and your petitioner as in duty bound with every prey. Ordered that they be referred to a committee. The following gentlemen were accordingly appointed: Mr. Justice Grimke, General Pinckney, and Edward Rutledge.
There you go.
So they okay, that just separates the two right there.
They gave them a status of white. This is common not only in South Carolina, it's common throughout the South. So your relatives may be classified as white, but they're not if you descend from some of these Africans that they call free Moors. This is the only law that these Moors run around here talk about, the Sundry Act of 1790, and you see this law was implemented in South Carolina.
So when they call them the sundry free Moors, what does that mean?
They're not slaves.
So the brothers that are walking around and calling themselves Moors, this is who they are then.
That's what they want to claim they are, but you see those Moors descend from Morocco.
Right. So they are not indigenous to here, because a lot of them, they call themselves the Washita Moors, the blah blah blee Moors. So they really not are indigenous. They're just trying to what?
Well, you see what it just said, right?
Right.
Now I'm going to send you something else to prove blacks were slave owners. Read this document that I just put in your Facebook. Another one from the archives. Read this petition.
Petition details?
Yeah, read that.
And people are listening. If you're on Facebook, you can documents and I'll send them right to you. This is petition details. South Carolina, Charleston. You want me to start where? At the abstract?
Salutation.
To the Honorable William James, Waddy Thompson, Henry William DeSar, Theodore Galliard, and Thomas Waddles, Judge of the Court of Equity in the state, James Dobin. Filing date, January 25th, 1814. Ending date, January 25th, 1814.
Abstract. Go ahead.
Samuel Holman, a free man of color, asks that Anthony Chenette, his attorney and agent, account for the action while Holman was in Africa. Holman states that Chenette charged him $8,236 for sundry supplies of the domestic kind in 1805, having no suspicion then that the sum was incorrect and unjust. He executed the said Chenette a mortgage of 42 Negroes. In the fall of 1805, Holman entered into agreement with Frederick Tavel for a joint voyage to the coast of Africa, with Tavel advancing the necessary funds for the trip. To secure his debt to Tavel, Holman executed a simple indemnity bond for $12,000 that was secured by the same 42 Negroes already mentioned as having been mortgaged to Anthony Chenette. Prior to his voyage, Holman appointed Chenette his agent to transact his business during his absence. Charging that Chenette illegally seized and sold certain slaves, Holman avers that he has applied. Holman avers that he has applied to the said Anthony as his agent to make out a full and fair statement of all his transactions as his attorney during his absence. But the said Chenette hath hereto wholly refused and keeps your orator totally ignorant of the state of his property and funds in his hands. He therefore prays that Chenette be ordered to answer his charges and that he be decreed to deliver up to him the bond and mortgage. Holman also prays that the defendants not be allowed to molest, seize, carry away, sell, or otherwise dispose of any of the Negroes mentioned. He said bond and answer his charges that he be decreed to deliver up that was the end of it. Holman also prays that the defendants not be allowed to molest, seize, carry away, sell, or otherwise dispose of any of the Negroes mentioned in said bond and mortgage. Result, partially granted.
Now, does this look like all Negroes, all Africans in South Carolina were enslaved?
Sure don't.
Many of these African Americans who choose to be African Americans, your African ancestors were slave owners in South Carolina. This is just one case. After the Civil War, laws were created called Jim Crow that stripped people of their property Therefore, making the offspring think they never owned anything. That is the reason for Sherman going through the South, burning everything. Then they're going to reconstruct. Because the majority of the slave owners in the South, especially South Carolina, were not white. They were free African. And they wasn't the mulatto type. They were the black Sambo Africans that come from Africa.
So, Chief.
Slavery had nothing to do with color in the beginning. It dealt with capitalism. Jim Crow made it about color. That's why it was a rush to hang Negroes after slavery. Jim Crow years, they were hanging by the payload. Because probably some of them free Africans were giving them poor Irish and Scottish hell, excuse my word, in slavery, and it was revenge time.
Ooh.
You know, like he's saying it, go read the history of the congressional records. And as a Native American and an American Indian, I'm going to tell it on the black Africans just like I'm going to tell it on the white Irish and the German. You came here among my people.
Wow. So Chief.
Yes.
So basically, what you saying, the story roots, that was fabricated, more to bring more confusion into the table, right?
Let me tell you what I had. Next caller. To me carefully, and audience, listen very carefully. This shows the ignorance in things. The brother said to me he was related to Jane Pittman. I said to him, Jane Pittman's story is fiction. She never existed. How are you related to Miss Jane Pittman? And that's a fictional character. How do your roots tie to her? She never existed.
I thought she did.
That's crazy.
Wow. Area code 205. You had a question for the Chief?
No, I didn't have a question. I got knocked offline, so I wanted to call in so that I can continue to listen.
Okay. Chief, in these last few minutes, tell the audience again how they can contact you and give us some closing thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, Chief is going to be with us for the next 10 weeks on Thursdays. For any questions you may have, any questions any of your relatives may have, when you go back and study what the information that he shared, and it's right in our face. And Chief, I want to thank you for sharing this with us. Give your address, give your information once again, and please leave us with some closing thoughts that we can take through the weekend and the rest of the week until you're back with us again.
On behalf of my family and my living spiritual ancestors that are still here, death is only a transition. Your ancestors, your mother, your father, your brother, your grandfather, or grandmother, uncle, or aunt, if you have consciousness to listen, their spirit lives and still here and communicate with you. That is one of the talents and ways of the indigenous people. I share this information because I know what it meant to me. And if I share with others, then they can have and know. This is nothing to charge for. Information is free. I'm just passing the word. Because I don't want you to be ignorant, and I want you to know. Because there's no greater feeling of knowing where you truly come from. I get tickled in my sleep at night that I can name 12 generations of ancestors. Knowing who you are.
I'm ready.
How can black people rise up and overcome?
How can they rise up and overcome? Oh, can they overcome?
That is correct.
Respect, but this is business that needs to be taken care of, you know. Slap on the back is all fine and dandy. Yeah. But it needs promotion. It needs promotion. It needs, yeah. Speak to me. Are you laughing, biatch? You find it funny? You find it funny?
But change your motherfucking mindset. You wanna know why you ain't got shit? Cause you ain't thinking about shit. I come out the door every day with this shit on my mind. I'm gonna give me a bag. Fuck wrong with you? I'm gonna give me some cash. Change your motherfucking mindset, man. You think pennies, you get pennies. Bitch, I'm thinking dollars.